Hi, I'm Dr. Carl, and today I wanted to discuss the hateful term incel that many feminists throw around. I've been meaning to make this video for a while now, but what finally prompted me was that Olivia Wilde, while mentioning a movie she recently starred in, said that the villain of that movie was inspired by Jordan Peterson and that he is a hero to the incel community. First of all, Dr. Jordan Peterson is an intellectual giant, and he has been an inspiration to millions of people, especially younger men. That is a demographic that has been grossly underserved, as our young men are in crisis. Indeed, men have a suicide rate more than 4 times that of women, are less likely to graduate from high school, go on to college. Indeed, pretty much any social ill we have are more negatively affected. And this is a demographic that has at best been ignored. At worst, anytime somebody, like those of us in the men's rights movement, try to mention this or reach out, we get this horrible, hate-filled defensive reaction. So, here's a group of people that need leaders that inspire them. And indeed, I have read comments that people have written in the comments section that Jordan Peterson inspired, they were suicidal, and he inspired them to turn their lives around, and that they are no longer suicidal. So, we need more people like him. For the record, I don't agree with everything he says. That's to be expected. And indeed, as a men's rights advocate, not everything he said has been completely positive to the movement. But again, he's done a lot of good, and we need more people like him. At this point, I wanted to mention more about the dating scene for younger men, especially those in their teens and 20s, and how many women are clueless as to just how rough that is. And indeed, that's partly why this term incel is very hurtful. I should say at this point that if you ask a feminist to describe an incel, what you will get is a description of an abusive loser jerk. But that is not who the incels are. Indeed, the abusive loser jerks seem to have no trouble finding girlfriends. At this point, I want to give a hat tip to Hannah Milling. 4 years ago, she and a group of women in Germany made a video from women to men, and if you haven't seen it, it's really heartwarming, it's really wonderful, where basically they apologize for some of the nasty things that women have often done to men. For example, things like, "We did everything we could to seduce you and then called you a creep for noticing." But one mentioned specifically, "We said we wanted you to be kind and intelligent only to date the bad boys." Indeed, it's been said, often the nicest guys you'll ever meet are the ones who don't have girlfriends. And at this point, like I said, I wanted to get into a little more of how difficult the dating scene is for men in their teens and 20s. I've seen people study this who say that in terms of sexual market value, at age 23, women are a 10 and men are a 4. By 36, it's the exact opposite. So late 20s, early 30s is kind of when it's a little more even. But if you haven't heard of Nora Vincent's work, and I wanted to say I was very saddened to hear of her passing several months ago. She tried to live for 18 months as a man, just to see what it's like. And she later wrote a book, Self-Made Man. And there's a great interview from 2020 with her. And if you haven't seen this or read the book, you really should. It's really fabulous, very interesting. And in many of the ways she said how difficult it is to be a man in ways she didn't realize. She mentioned the dating scene. Now, remember, as a lesbian, she both dates women, and as a woman, she knows what women would like. And yet, trying to be a heterosexual man in the dating scene was extremely difficult for her. And indeed, the female reporter on 2020 asked her, "Do you think we know what it's like to be men?" She said, "We don't have a clue." To give another example of this, there was an Australian vlogger who asked a female friend of his in Portugal to create a Tinder account for a non-existent man. I believe he was 23 and an average guy, decent job, basically an average guy. And she was shocked how difficult it was for him. And she said, it was so difficult. I found this very upsetting. And I said to myself, it's not even my damn life. Indeed, it was nobody's life. It was a fake guy. Yet at the same time, that's the real world experience for probably hundreds of millions of men around the world. And as if all this wasn't difficult enough, many feminists have tried to create, well, I don't know if it was intentional, I'd like to think it's not, but through vague sexual harassment policies, they have turned the dating scene into an absolute minefield, one in which the mines can retroactively go off years or even decades later. The result of which, you put those two things together, and it's extremely difficult for men in the dating scene at this age, teens and 20s. On a side note, many of which, as a result, understandably turn to prostitution, which is another thing that feminists then try to go after. Indeed, I've done videos about this, I'll do others. Sometimes even wanting to make it illegal to buy sex but not sell it, but again, I digress, that's a separate topic. But it was a fascinating article I saw by an escort in Australia where prostitution's legal. She mentioned she's been on numerous paid dates with wonderful men. For example, one spent hours putting together a romantic playlist for their night together. And her point was once, you wonder where all the good men have gone? Come to our brothels. You'll meet them there. And I mentioned late 20s, early 30s is kind of when the advantage on the dating scene flips. And there have been numerous videos that I've seen of women at this age, some were literally in tears, wondering where have all the good men gone and why have my prospects, dried up. And the thing is, there's a part of me that feels sorry for them, but there's also a part of me that says, you had a 10-year head start on the dating scene. And, admittedly, I'm making assumptions here. I don't know these women personally. And you blew it by insisting on dating loser jerks when there were probably all kinds of great men who would have been honored to have dated you, would have been on top of the world to have married you, and to have provided a wonderful, comfortable life for you. And yet, we're supposed to feel sorry for them. And there's a part of me that does too. But interestingly, nobody ever calls them incels. On a side note, I wanted to mention a parable I saw recently. A woman about that age prays to God. She says, God, I'm getting up in the years. I'm nearly 30. I want a man who's kind, intelligent, etc., etc., a number of positive traits. God, can you please send me this man? God's response, I sent him to you years ago, but you friend-zoned him. Now, when I or others mention some of these things, a lot of feminists get very defensive and say, whoa, you think you're entitled to sex or a woman's body? No, not at all. We're just mentioning how difficult the dating scene is. And I hasten to add that if anything, I see this more on the other side. I've seen women write articles shaming men who refuse to date single mothers. Well, you can have whatever standards you want. And it's understandable if someone says, I don't want to put myself in that situation. I don't want to have another man's child say to me, you can't tell me what to do, you're not my father. Or to have another man jealous that I'm spending time with his child. Or anything like that. It's completely reasonable that a man would have that as a criteria. And yet I see women sort of shame men. Well, aren't they in essence incels at that point? Also, since the dating scene's gotten so difficult, become a minefield, and with all these issues, and also furthermore, if a man does get a wife, if she divorces him, he may be screwed by the family court system, etc., etc. A lot of men have gone MGTOW. That's MGTOW, men going their own way. I've been pretty harsh towards that in the past, and I find it sad and unfortunate, but I do understand why many men have. And yet, I've seen all kinds of vicious things said by feminists about MGTOW. What? These are men who leave you alone. What's so horrible about that? Do you feel you're entitled to them? Doesn't that make you an incel? So basically, I want to wrap this video up by saying one of the many reasons I got involved with the men's rights movement is I want to see an end to this horrible gender war. And terms like incel just add fuel to the fire. Because women don't know what it's like to be men on the dating scene. And by the time the tables flip, it's too late. There's resentment on both sides. And I wish that women could just listen and understand to these things and what men are saying. Indeed, many feminists encouraged men to speak up, say what your concerns are. They swore they would be understanding, and yet they turned out to be some of the nastiest and most vicious people on the times when men actually did speak up. They called them horrible things like incel. So again, please try to take all this into consideration. I'm Dr. Carl. Enjoy.